Harry Williams, a 75-year-old veteran, was sitting quietly that day at a corner table in a noisy diner where there were a lot of people and conversations. He was dressed modestly in a warm but neat jacket, and his strong, overworked hands were clutching a cup of cooling coffee. Harry ordered it to pass the time while waiting for his son, who was running late. He could not even imagine what trials and humiliations he would have to go through in the next few minutes. Suddenly, the door of the cafe opened, and two police officers, Officers George and Gilbert, entered the room. They looked around the room complacently, looking for an empty table. Their gazes immediately landed on Harry, who was sitting alone. George leaned over to his partner, snidely threw a remark and grinned, and Gilbert burst out laughing in response. In their opinion, the old man clearly did not fit into the interior of the establishment, located in an area for wealthy citizens. The sight of the shabbily dressed elderly man seemed suspicious to them, and they decided to intervene. Approaching the table, George abruptly asked Harry, without greeting, what he was doing here. There was no politeness in his voice, just a commanding tone. Harry calmly looked up from his mug and explained that he was expecting his son. His voice was calm, without a hint of fear or annoyance. However, his equanimity only angered the police. Gilbert noted with a grin that in this area you don't often see a poor old man trying to settle in with well-off people. These words caused both of them to laugh, but Harry did not react in any way. He just repeated that he was expecting a son. But the officers wouldn't let up. George demanded the documents. It was not a request, but a direct order. Harry reached into his pocket without protest and pulled out a veteran's ID, the same document he had carried with him for decades, a symbol of his service and sacrifice. George looked at him contemptuously and waved him away, sighing that it was most likely a fake. Then he casually returned the ID. Gilbert picked up on his words and stated that he did not believe that a man like Harry could serve. According to him, at that time, people like him were doing hard work or washing dishes at most. They tried to reduce everything that the veteran had experienced to an insignificant role. George just laughed. At this time, the atmosphere in the cafe began to change. Conversations subsided. Glances were directed to a table in the corner. Some watched with concern, others with curiosity, but no one interfered. Despite the outright humiliation, Harry maintained his dignity. It wasn't the first time he had encountered a biased attitude. The officers continued to push. George threatened that if Harry did not leave the diner immediately, he would be taken out by force. The veteran tried to explain himself again, but was rudely interrupted. George clearly wasn't going to listen to him. To him, Harry was just an outsider creating an unpleasant atmosphere in the establishment. The tension reached its limit. The police hovered over the elderly man, waiting for him to obey. But Harry stayed where he was, not moving. His hands were still on the table, and his gaze was steady and direct. His silent resistance only irritated the police more. George demanded that he leave again. Harry just took a slow sip of his coffee and said he wasn't bothering anyone. He has every right to sit here, just like anyone else. This certainty momentarily confused George. However, the silence of others continued to fuel the permissiveness of the police. George suddenly kicked the chair next to Harry, and it fell to the floor with a crash. The people in the cafe flinched. The veteran was forced to stand up, but showed no fear or panic. George came closer and began to roughly frisk the old man, muttering that he had to make sure he wasn't hiding anything. Harry raised his hands in a gesture of submission, not out of fear, but out of common sense. He understood that everything could easily end in tragedy. He had been in similar situations many times before, and he knew better than to remain calm. But anger boiled up inside him. A veteran who had gone through the war was now being humiliated by young police officers in his own country. Meanwhile, Gilbert picked up his worn veteran's hat from the table, a symbol of pride and memory. He looked at it disdainfully and, without hesitation, threw it on the floor. Harry's lips twitched, but he restrained himself. The veteran didn't let them see his weakness. The customers gasped, and some even got up from their seats, but no one intervened. These two were known to be violent and aggressive officers, and people were afraid of them. Harry stood motionless while George grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back. The old man clenched his teeth in pain, but did not make a sound. He knew what pain was, physical and mental, but it was especially painful to realize that all this was happening in his native country. George and Gilbert laughed at how fragile the veteran turned out to be. Harry, barely able to contain his anger, finally said, "You're going too far. You can't even imagine what I had to go through." These words only angered the officers. "Are you telling us how to work?" George snorted. "You're sleeping in a cell tonight. Let's see who will come to the aid of a nobody like you." He snapped the handcuffs on Harry's wrists. Gilbert, in turn, grabbed the veteran's cane, which he had been leaning on for many years, and mockingly snapped it in half, throwing it aside. "You won't need it anymore," he said sarcastically. The police were about to escort Harry out of the diner when suddenly the old man lifted his chin and pointed at the card left on the table. George was annoyed, but he took it anyway. He expected to see something insignificant, but when he looked, he suddenly turned pale. The name on the card was clearly written, Commissioner Robert Williams. He realized who they had just arrested and insulted. It was the father of their boss, the head of the police. Understanding came instantly. All the arrogance instantly disappeared from the faces of George and Gilbert. They released Harry and began to mumble uncertain apologies, trying to justify themselves. They didn't know who he was. But Harry didn't answer. He just stood there and waited for what would happen next. At that moment, Commissioner Robert Williams entered the diner. His appearance made everyone freeze. He quickly looked around the room and saw the following picture: an old father in handcuffs, a broken cane, a chair on the floor, and two stunned subordinates nearby. The commissioner approached his father. Pain was visible on his face. Then he turned to the officers. In a calm but firm voice, he asked, "What do you think you're doing here?" George and Gilbert tried to justify themselves. They stuttered and stumbled. All they could say was that they didn't know who Harry was. But the commissioner cut them off. "It doesn't matter. Everyone deserves respect. And this man is a veteran. Citizen, my father or not, you should have behaved like a human being." The officers were silent, realizing the gravity of what they had done. The commissioner ordered them to leave the diner immediately. George and Gilbert looked down and left in silence. When they left, Williams approached his father and took off his handcuffs. He apologized not only for being late, but also for the behavior of his people. He knew that no amount of words would make up for the pain Harry had caused. But Harry didn't demand an apology. He looked at his son with pride and said, "You did the right thing. That's the main thing." What do you think about this story? Write in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channels so you don't miss any amazing new stories. See you.